I've been playing the Final Fantasy series since like 1998. It all started with Final Fantasy VII for me. And then as time went on, I moved from 8, 9 to 10, but I've always been interested in seeing what's next for the series. I love to envelop myself in the newest title. And then once that's finished, I start to think, well, what's going to be next for Final Fantasy? So in today's video, I want to try and make some realistic predictions, a realistic wish list for what could be next for the Final Fantasy series, being Final Fantasy 17. As usual, before we do all that, don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy weekly Final Fantasy and JRPG content, and comment down below. Let me know if you agree with any of these predictions or wish list items here, or if you have something else to add. I'd be interested to know what you guys think. Let's get going. First things first, we need to look at how to get Final Fantasy back on track. I'm going to do this according to my opinion here. It could be wrong, it could be right, but I'd be interested to know if you agree with what I'm saying here. So Final Fantasy as a series in the last, couple years has fallen short of sales expectations. If you're following the recent news trends, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and Final Fantasy 16 aren't the smash hits that we thought they were going to be. And a lot of it boils down to sales numbers, which is very disappointing because these are games that I've been hyped for the last couple of years. And it looks like the climate of the games industry is shifting. A lot more people are playing live service games. I don't dabble in those. I like my single player experiences. I love my long JRPGs. Traditionally, these are the games that I'm going to buy day one. If they're $79.99, $69.99, or here in Australia, Final Fantasy 16 last year was like $129.99 at EB Games. It's a massive price tag for that game, but I want to support these games and I want to support the developers, so I'll always go and buy them more or less. But not enough people are buying them to recoup the development costs. So one thing that Square can do to fix that is just release multi-platform. It's difficult because, for example, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth was tailor-made for the PlayStation 5. Being able to run from one end of the world map to the other on the PlayStation 5 is incredibly seamless. So how do we even make that possible without loading screens or pop-ins on another console? But I suppose that's just the risk that you have to take. And the other thing that you have to factor in is, are these games costing too much money? Has Final Fantasy become too much of a AAA series or AAA game that it's just costing too much money and they're not getting enough back? It could be, because of the exclusivity deals going straight to PlayStation, and there's just not enough of an interested install base on the PlayStation 5 right now to go buy those games and make it worth their while. If you look at the original Final Fantasy VII, it could be said that that was one of the first AAA games, being one of the most expensive games to make at that time. Look at all the technology that went into that. It was a 3-disc game, more or less. So unfortunately, it looks like Square needs to go multi-platform and maybe cut their costs in development. And here's how I think they can do that. Feel free to disagree, but this is kind of where I want the Final Fantasy series to lean anyway. So this could actually come in handy for Final Fantasy 17. Let's step away from a massive, impressive 3D game with these massive fights, massive worlds. Let the series go back to its roots with pixel graphics. Yes, while I personally love the fully realized 3D, almost lifelike versions of Final Fantasy, it's not what made me love this series to begin with. You gotta remember, somebody who is as old as me, or maybe even a little bit older, first played these games on like a Super Nintendo or a PlayStation 1, so visual fidelity, yes, while it was impressive back then, may not have aged as well these days, but this is what we grew up with, so I'd be quite happy to have a return to form in some respect by going back to a pixel aesthetic. Just look at the graphics of Triangle Strategy, Octopath Traveler 1 and 2, Live Alive. All these HD 2D games, as they're called, are stunning, beautiful games. So why shouldn't the Final Fantasy series go back to something like that? Like I said, if cost of development is a concern, you can probably cut your budget in half and then some, purely because you're working with a pixel-based format as opposed to, a lifelike 3D rendered thing where you got to do motion capture, all that kind of stuff. All that stuff costs money. So strip it back, go back to the basics. And the best way to make as much of an impact with going back to an old school look would be actually going back to an old school battle system. Make Final Fantasy turn-based again. I'm not ashamed to say it. I've really enjoyed the amazing battle system that Final Fantasy VII Rebirth has had, which has improved. I don't even know how they could do it in the first place, but improved on the remake battle system. I liked Final Fantasy XVI's battle system as well, but I'm a traditionalist. I like turn-based challenge. And I wouldn't even be mad if they introduced a conditional turn-based system from Final Fantasy X. That's something that we haven't seen since Final Fantasy X in the Final Fantasy series. It was a total one-off. because we're kind of talking about combat already, I think it's best to talk about magic as well. Magic really hasn't mattered in the last few Final Fantasies. I mean, it was poorly implemented in Final Fantasy 15, and more or less your magic changed or your attacks changed based on what icon form you were having the power of during Final Fantasy 16. And you know, it was cool, but it was, I don't know, magic really didn't make a difference in Final Fantasy 16. I would love to see magic matter again. And of course, the best way to do that is house it within a turn-based combat system. And even better, make the magic system work kind of like the materia system or like the magicite system or something like that. Or maybe even bring back character classes or jobs. I mean, these are things that I really loved. And I suppose, you know, if you're looking at the progression of Final Fantasy 1 through 6, the job system peaked at Final Fantasy 5, and maybe job abilities had gone between different characters and roles that the characters have as opposed to specific job titles. But honestly, I wouldn't mind seeing a bit of fan service here with some jobs coming back. And really the last time that we saw anything like that in the Final Fantasy series was Final Fantasy X-2 with dress spheres. Before I get to my next point, don't forget to hit that subscribe button because 88% of the people that watch my channel on the regular are not subscribed. If you like weekly Final Fantasy content and weekly JRPG content, this might just be the place to be. Anyway, on to the next point. I think Final Fantasy 15 and 16 hit the sweet spot for how many characters are in your inner circle, I suppose, for main characters anyway. So I think if we target a group of maybe 3 to 6 with 5 probably being the sweet spot of characters, that really gives the player an opportunity to invest emotionally in the characters, their whys, their stories, what they're doing. Because for me, if I can emotionally invest in a character, I'm hooked. And some of the characters in the more recent Final Fantasy series have been really hard to just latch on to. I don't know if it's bad writing or I just haven't vibed with some of these characters per se, but you know, it's just one of the takeaways I've had from my experience with the series lately. I suppose if they do go ahead with a 3 to 6 character range, you know, again, 5 being the sweet spot, I would love a really great character-driven story. I love the idea of one main hero and the hero's story progressing, but I want to know more about the other characters in the party, what they're doing and why they're doing it. Again, just allowing me the opportunity to emotionally latch onto a character. It's the best thing that any dev can do for me. And one last point on characters here, and this kind of goes back into the turn-based combat. I want more of an emphasis on strategy who's in your party. I want your party to really make a difference. I mean, I don't mind having just the coolest characters or the story characters in the party, but give me an opportunity to strategize. Give me an opportunity to think, who's the best party combination for this? Make my party choices count. I find that, you know, that didn't even happen with Final Fantasy 16 because only Clive was controllable, and you know, Final Fantasy 15 you only had 4 guys at the same time. So I want the element of strategy to come back as well if they do go old school. Also, if we're going old school, let's bring back traditional summons. Let's bring back finding, you know, the summons or the espers or the magicite or the icons or eidolons wherever, somewhere in the world. Make it matter when you find them. Make it have an impact when you find them. I mean, I just love, you know, the old school cutscenes of Final Fantasy 7 when you bring out a summon during battle, or Final Fantasy 8. I mean, make it have an impact rather than, you know, transforming into these characters or beasts like Final Fantasy 16. And Final Fantasy 15 was cool, but again, I just want more of a return to form for old school summons. I also wouldn't mind a change of setting. Let's do something completely different. Do we embrace a 100% total futuristic setting of Final Fantasy? And I suppose that could really lend its hand to going old school. And I wouldn't mind something different. I mean, Final Fantasy 16 more or less went back to its roots in terms of setting, and I really enjoyed that. But with every Final Fantasy, they're taking chances and making changes, and it doesn't necessarily work every single time, but I do anticipate what's the setting going to be, who's the main character going to be, who's the supporting cast going to be, and how are they going to make a difference on the world, and who's the bad guy going to be. And you know, I want more of an impactful final villain. I mean, Final Fantasy 16's villain Ultima, he was okay. I mean, I thought he was pretty cool for what he was, but I just didn't feel like I was totally shaking in my boots like a Sephiroth would make me do. And even Arden was a really cool and very tragic villain, but again, I didn't feel like that there was this like impending threat. If I don't take this guy down, the whole world's gonna end. And I feel like the last time that really happened to me might have been like Final Fantasy X. So those are my thoughts on what could be next for the Final Fantasy series, but I would love to know what you guys think, so don't forget to comment down below. Hit the video here for more content. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you guys on the next video.